Welcome to the last video segment of our series. I'm Betsy Bosley and I'm the dietitian for the Pathway to Health and Wellness program. And so I wanted to prepare a little celebration feast. And a lot of celebration dishes tend to be very unhealthy. If you think about the last party or get together you went to, there was probably a lot of fatty foods, maybe some hot dogs or hamburgers or, some sort of other high fat meat. There was probably a cheese plate, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And there was probably maybe a high fat dessert like a cake. So these foods are definitely not a good choice at these parties. And today we're going to talk about some healthier alternatives to these. And I'd like to first start out this segment by talking about some of the typical foods you would find at a party. So the food that is on your left is going to be the cheese slices, and those tend to be very high in fat and salt. So a serving size of those is going to be 4 slices of cheese, and that runs around 7 grams of saturated fat and 200 milligrams of sodium. The food on your right is a carrot cake, and I think it's a pretty sad looking piece of carrot cake. And just for that little piece, it's about 540 calories. It's 9 grams of saturated fat, 590 milligrams of sodium, and 43 grams of sugar. So definitely not something that you want to try to include in your healthy diet. And it's not just the foods that are bad, it's going to be the portion size. So for this cheese, let's show you what a portion looks like. So a portion of this cheese is 4 slices. So it's not very thick. It's pretty wimpy. I would probably eat a little bit more than that. And so I'll show you what my portion would normally be. Might be, I think it's pretty easy just to keep munching on these cheese cubes when they're at parties. We don't realize how much fat is in them. And not only are we going to be doing the cheese, but we'll probably have it with crackers. So that's going to add even more fat and salt. The other food, the carrot cake, you can kind of see how big it is here. It's not very big. We might do a bigger slice even. And you think about how this is 560 calories, so it might be even more, and especially if we put ice cream on the top. In contrast, we're going to be making some healthier party foods that I think your guests will love just as much as these unhealthy foods we just talked about. The first is a pan of black bean brownies, and we're going to make those obviously with black bean, a lot less sugar than a traditional brownie, a little canola oil instead of something like butter that is used in a traditional cake. And that will give us a lot of fiber and will fill us up without all of the calories. And people will not even know that there's black beans, I promise. And the other food that we're going to be making is a big pot of vegetarian chili. And I think chili is just a really great thing to bring to a party. People love it because, it kind of reminds them of football season. And it feeds a lot of people. It's really filling and it's really healthy. So let's get started making the chili. So we're going to turn on our heat for our chili. And the first ingredient that we're going to add is some olive oil. And this calls for a 1/3 cup of olive oil. And you can do less if you'd like to. It doesn't really, it just kind of changes the flavor a bit if you use more or less, but it doesn't really matter. So I might do a little less. I don't think we need quite that much today. Yeah. And then the next thing we're going to add is 2 cups of chopped mushrooms. Okay, feeling I'm going to spill this. The next thing we're going to do is add some onion. Cup of onion. And then got a cup of cubed carrots. And a cup of bell peppers. And again, a lot of these ingredients are very easy to get when they're frozen. So you can get frozen diced carrots, you can get frozen peppers and onions. So if you don't feel like chopping that evening, it's really easy just to buy them frozen and toss them in. And after this, we're going to do a 1/4 cup of minced celery. And toss that in. And then we have a tablespoon of minced garlic. All right, so I'm just going to stir up these vegetables and get them coated in olive oil. And then we're going to add our spices, which is really an important part of the chili. So I've got chili powder right here. And we're going to measure out 1 tablespoon. Again, you can kind of add more or less depending on how spicy you like your chili. And then after the chili powder, we're going to add some cumin. And about 1 tablespoon of that. And then after that, we have some oregano. And so we're going to do 3/4 of a teaspoon of that. So we'll just do a little bit less than my teaspoon. These recipes, they're very flexible as far as amount of spice that you use. You can kind of, if you add a little bit more accidentally, don't throw your pot out of food. It's still probably totally delicious. It just might be, you might want to add a few more vegetables if you overdo it on too much of the spice, and that way it can kind of dilute it. Okay, so let's stir up all the spices with all the good vegetables. And I think a lot of people think that you have to have meat in chili, and I would argue that I really don't think you need it. If you add things like mushrooms that have kind of that savory flavor, I think that it's just as good. And if you really miss that kind of texture of the crumbles, you could totally use tofu in your chili or some of those soy crumbles as well. Okay, and so then I'm just going to use some black pepper, just kind of for a finishing spice of this. And then I'm going to add about 1/2 can of tomato paste. So we got a spoon. And then we have a whole 28-ounce can of whole peeled tomatoes with tomato juice. And we're just going to pop this whole thing in. And I'm going to try to protect myself from tomato splatters. This is going to add some good liquid to this soup. And while the tomatoes are in here, I'll kind of smash them up into big chunks. Obviously, you could smash it as much as you want. It's going to have some really good texture. And then after this, we're going to add 3 separate types of beans. And I think that beans are really one of the most important ingredients in a chili. Okay, so we have pinto beans and no salt added. And I didn't drain these. The juices kind of just are going to give some extra liquid to the chili. And then the next one is no salt added kidney beans. These always remind me of chili. And some people will do just kidney beans in their chili, but I like the different colors of the different beans. Okay, and then the last one, the old favorite of mine, black beans. So we'll add these. All right, and I just love looking at when you stir it because you just see all the different colors. And I think that's what a good chili should look like. So now we are just going to put the lid on this and let it simmer for about 30 minutes to kind of let the flavors blend. And while we're doing that, we're going to get started on our black bean brownies. The first thing we need to do to make our brownies is to take an 8x8 pan, and we're just going to spray it with some cooking spray. And this is just to prevent the brownies from sticking. And then basically all of our other ingredients here can go in our blender. So we're going to take 1 can of no salt added black beans, And this is a very unusual ingredient for a brownie. It's kind of going to be taking the place of some of the fat. It really keeps things moist. These are going to be really fudgy brownies. And these are a great brownie for anyone that is gluten intolerant because there is no flour in the brownie. So, and the next ingredient that we're going to add are going to be our eggs. And we have 3 eggs. Okay. All right. And I'm gonna go wash off my hands for a second. I'll be right back. All right, so I'm back from washing my hands, and the next ingredient is going to be 3 tablespoons of canola oil. And again, like we mentioned before, this is going to be a heart-healthy fat, so it will be much better than adding butter or some sort of hydrogenated margarine or something to our brownies. Okay, so 3 tablespoons. And then let's just blend these 3 ingredients together. All right, so it's nice and blended. You don't really want big chunks of black beans in the brownies because it might give your secret away, although maybe people will just think they're chocolate chips. So that would be okay. And after this, we're going to add 3/4 cup of sugar. And again, this brownie mix makes a lot. So 3/4 cup is not too bad in the scope of things. Okay. You can probably do even a little bit less. I find like things like fat and sugar, a lot of times you can add just a little bit less than the recipe calls for, and it's still fine. And then after this, what makes it really chocolatey, but without the fat, is going to be baking cocoa. And that's really what is going to give our brownies the rich chocolate flavor without the fat and without the sugar. So let's add this. And so we're going to use 1/2 cup. So that's about 1/2 cup right there. All right, so we're going to pop that in to the blender. Then after we add that, we're going to add 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder. And this is kind of what's going to make the brownies rise. And so let's add that. So 1/2. Then I've got my 1/4 teaspoon right here. All right. And then we're going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. All right. And then the very last step, we're going to add a 1/2 cup of chocolate chips. And I like to add the mini chocolate chips just because it kind of spreads out the chocolatey goodness more. And we're not adding the whole 1/2 cup to the blender. We're only adding a 1/4 cup, and then the other 1/4 cup we're going to sprinkle over the top. And because we eat with our eyes a lot more than we think. And so if we see those rich foods on top of our brownies, they're going to look even more decadent. So let's add. So this is a 1/2 cup measuring. So we're going to fill it up. And we're going to put about 1/2 of it in here. And then the other 1/2 we're going to save to sprinkle on top of the brownies. So now we're going to blend a bit more. And you might want to get a spatula. Ooh, it's like chocolate city. You might want to get a spatula and wipe down the walls of the blender so that all the cocoa gets incorporated. Okay, so just blend just a tad more. Okay. All right, so now that we have this all blended up, we are going to put it into our oiled pan. So my oven has been preheating to 350 degrees, and we're just gonna get all the goodness out, and then sprinkle the last bit of chips over the top. And take it over to the oven. We're going to be baking it in the oven for about 30 minutes. All right, so here are our finished products. We have our vegetarian chili, and then we have our healthy black bean brownies on this side. I hope you make these recipes in the future and bring them to parties to create a culture where the food is not only delicious, but it's nutritious. You can find the recipe for these brownies and all of our other recipes in all of the sessions at the Pathway to Health and Wellness website. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm going to enjoy a brownie now.